Chapter 2, Lesson 1 of Advanced Algebra. I'm going to tie some loose ends up when it comes to functions, and because we're using function now, you're going to see that word as we move throughout the book. There's some new language or vocabulary that you want to be aware of, so that when you're reading a problem or reading directions, you know what to look for, and some kind of tricks that you want to look out for. We just learned about the word function, and as always when we're reading math or English sentences, word problems, we want to look for phrases and words in English that we can translate into math symbols, and we did some of that earlier this year when we were doing translating exercises English into math. We learned, like, for example, the word is means equals, and it's showing or it's stating that whatever's on the left is equal to the right, and we have the math symbol of the equal to. So the word is an important word to recognize. Well, now that we have this new language or this new terminology or this new notation called function, we want to look for this word or this phrase function of when we're reading a word problem. And what does it mean? And actually the phrase function of is giving us some very important information. It's actually identifying for us what is going to be x, or the independent variable in the expression, and what is going to be y in the expression, or the dependent variable. So it's very important that as we're reading the English sentences, as we're reading the English directions or the word problems, whenever we see the phrase function of, we want to go, oh, wait a minute, that's telling me something. And so what is it telling me, and how is it telling me these two things? And here's what it looks like. Whenever you see the word or phrase, function of, what's immediately in front of the word function of, this is going to be your y values or your dependent variables. So whatever they're describing in the problem, that is going to be your y. Okay, it might be talking about distance. It might be talking about cost. Say cost is a function of, or let's say the distance is a function of. So those quantities that they're talking about are going to be the y variable in your equation when you write it. What comes after the phrase function of is going to be your independent. Sorry about that. That was Mr. Hammond needing some help getting into the teacher's lounge. Sorry about that. That was Mr. Hammond needed some help getting into the teacher's lounge. He needed a key. Anyways, what were we talking about? Independent, I think. Right. So once we see the word function of, or the phrase function of, we know that the independent quantity is going to come after that phrase. The dependent quantity is always going to come before the phrase. Now, this is one of the key things in doing algebra, is being able to figure out what's going to be independent and what's going to be dependent. It's really important when we're talking about applying this to world problems and real world problems and applicational problems, that this really becomes the most difficult thing for students, is being able to figure out what x is and what y is. Because once you know that, then setting up the function rule or the equations becomes a lot easier. So learning some of the vocabulary and learning what it shows me is very important. So look for the phrase function of, and when you see it, what's in the front is going to be your y. It's going to be your dependent variable. And what comes after is going to be your x, that's independent. Now, another thing that you're going to run into a lot is time. And time is always going to be your x. It's always going to be your independent variable. Everything that we do usually, that doesn't even make sense. Everything is usually. It's either everything always or usually sometimes. Okay, you should never use everything usually. Anyways, that was just talking to myself. Anyways, time is going to be independent 99% of the time. And in this book, I think it's 100% of the time. Time is always independent, because what happens, how much we pay someone, depends upon how much time they work. How much something costs sometimes depends upon how long it took someone to do the job for us. How much you pay on a cab ride is dependent upon how far you went. That's not time. I don't even know why I said that. How far you travel, how far you went depends upon how long you were traveling. So time is always independent And so therefore, when you're reading a word problem and you come across time, you're going to make that quantity your x value, and then the other quantity that they're talking about in the problem is going to be your y. So time is always going to be independent. So here's a quick example. We have this problem here. It says area of a function, area of a square is a function of the length of the sides of the square. So that a phrase that as soon as I read that, I should see, oh, there's something I know that I've seen before. That's an indicator. It tells me something. What comes first or before it is going to be my y, or my dependent variable, and what comes after is going to be my x. That's going to be my independent. The area of a square depends upon the lengths of the sides. That makes sense. The longer the sides, the bigger the area. So you'll notice that the word or the phrase function of separates and tells me or indicates to me what's going to be my y quantity and what's going to be my x. So we can then write the rule. Y depends upon x. Now, when I put in x, how do I get the y? Well, it says here as a function of the square of the sides. Sorry about that. Another interruption. That was Jericho. They're done with practice, and I'm going to give Jericho a ride home tonight. So let me very quickly finish this up then. So we have our independent variable is x. Our dependent variable is y. Now, how do we find the area of a square? We don't just put in x and that's the area. We know that's length times width. So if the side is x times the width x, that's actually x squared. So again, the idea here though is to be able to recognize and see the word or the phrase function of, which then indicates to me what my y or dependent variable is going to be, and then what my x and my independent variable is going to be. And that is really very key to doing word problems well and being successful the rest of this year. So look for that phrase, and then you'll be in good shape as you move forward.